So we need now to really establish the foliage, the trees behind our scene of the river and its rowers. Reminder of our swatch in here, the blues, the two blues and two yellows we've used so far. I had that little hint of the yellow ochre, which we just touched those clouds with. I kept it very light and breezy, which we want to do, so it's all light in yellows, and now you gain the confidence to start with darkening this foliage, and we're hopefully going to cut the back drop of this temple architecture from the sky and the foliage beyond. So look, brushes, keep them large for mark making. Palette underway, and we know that we can mix between these yellows and these two blues, those secondary, those greens that we need. But no harm if you've got a secondary palette of greens. I've got a sap green here and a viridian. You can use those as shortcuts, not a problem at all. So away we go. I'm going to use the blue again, the cobalt blue, just to start with, and I'm using this sparingly, but I'm just coming into the sort of backdrop here of the receding tree line here, and I'm using sort of small mark making, and it's hinting at the shadows, and it's sporadic. I'm conscious of the underpainting, that light yellow green. I want that to still show through in places. It gives the effect of dappled sunlight and so forth, and those parts of the trees and branches and foliage that's attracting light. You can see, don't be too precious and detailed in mark making. Just use a brush make and the mark making, two brushes, to give you different sorts of marks. Here's a trunk. These are the sort of elevated trees yonder and above, and you can see how they'll start to sort of frame this middle ground architectural detail. Really important now to really start to carve this form from the backdrop. So strong mark making, govern the palette and the tones attaining in colours, and you will begin to fashion this effect. So here you can see another brush here. I've got a flat brush also, which is quite useful for if you want to get sort of sharper, harder lines on the effect of the trees trunk. It's attaining branches, quite useful to use that in that way. And further away the mark making is smallest and smaller, and again I'm using the blue here just to position and these sort of effect of branches going away into against the bright sky, summer sky. So this takes a little bit of conjuring, and we're working towards the darks. We are wishing to get some really nice bold dark mark making and tonality to really frame, but we'll find the darks as we gain confidence, and letting the paper rest. Don't let it get too wet in areas. And coming back where I started here, and I'm just sort of starting to get a little bit more depth on this side, and sort of furthest sort of bush tree line. You can see I've got receding fields and trees right up to a horizon line there now evolving. That's what I was hoping for, to catch that sort of distance space back across the landscape from the and so forth. So beginning to darken this background foliage, remembering the combination of brush and the mark making to suit. Going to increase the sense of qualities of the green, and you can see here we're having to go in between the architecture and against the architecture to sort of cut it out. I'm noticing here that I've got there's a sort of pagoda, this awning, and yes, there's you've got to look through that to the foliage beyond, etc. I've got a topiary also, this side of the building, the bank. That we're just sort of registering that also. That needs to happen. I think there's a hedge here, quite a neatly trimmed hedge. So the sort of mark making and tonality of the greens to suit are important. How you begin to sort of model and form the mark making larger, bigger, bolder in places as you begin to become more happier. But as you become happier with this, the elements of your design and painting, create bigger, larger swathes of mark making, especially here to the foreground. I've got a volume of foliage here, a very dark sensation there. It's all in balance, and we're trying to keep that sort of spontaneity and shadows too. Lastly, another element now is a warm colour in the foliage. That will really create the depth required in places, especially in these areas and around the architecture. That's going to help that addition to the palette. So we could use a alizarin with the blue. If you've got a secondary, as I have, a secondary violet, something like that, it's going to add warmth. It's going to add a warmth to your mixing. Do you see on that swatch? It's going to add that much more dimension to your depth of your shadows. But this comes in last, and it's going to be used very carefully. This is the first warm colour we're using as we're evolving the palette, and it's going to be used in a very carefully. And it's going to be used to pick out just in those places where we want to create real sort of depth in the volume of the tones that we've evolved. And obviously a warm colour lends itself to sort of description of the trunks, the tree trunks, the boughs of the trees. So you can start to expand and use a warm colour within the context of the foliage, and that's what I'm just beginning to perceive, especially in these areas here. There are these tree trunks peering above the architecture. I'm just starting to put some warm colours, and you can see how these are going to be much. It's going to be much darker in tone. So we've now created enough of a backdrop to this middle ground and the approaching foreground. We really need to get this building set in some form now. We probably return. We might well return at the end, as we'll see, to the foliage and sky. It will need tuning in completion. But let's get on with this building now. Just a reminder of the swatch so far, the colours used at this point. Got the pencil out again. Remember that little trick I used, a coloured pencil here, and it's just to delineate once more. It's just to go across around, and just to make sure of some of the drawing. You can just revisit. You may need to do that. There's windows attaining the architectural detail. It's been useful just to come over and just revise a little bit where those points are, and it's now about getting that building somewhere set. And let's make a formal important comment about the light source. The light source, I think, is quite obvious. It's raking here from the top right, the sunlight drenching across. So consequently the building and this awning here is in shadow on the left side. I'm going to start off with that cerulean blue. Remember that one? That cerulean, we used it earlier in the sky and some of the tints in the foliage. Let's use that cerulean just very thinly, and let's find our way in terms of shadow caused by the the architecture here. Very gently does it, just sort of finding our way about. These columns that support this dome, that one's in there's two there in shadow. I'm sort of just finding out a little bit about this architecture. This is a curvature here, and this is in shadow. Catches light at the bottom, it's under shadow there. Let's just catch that in the same way. There's a column we view through. That one too is in shadow. I think here also there's something happening in shadow. Shadow again, just trying to separate some of these. Come back to that again. So just viewing this in a very pale wash. There's an undercover, there's a void space beneath this. It's like a terrace. Eventually there are also railings, I believe there. So we'll put that into shadow, push that back in the same way. Making sort of judgments. There's a sense of also scale that begins to come about once we start with the architecture. It sort of sets the sort of human scale into the picture. There's sort of an alcove here, and most of that human scale is derived. There's a slanted apex roof jutting out from there. Let's just start to sort that out. Yes, the scale will be the window. There's three principal window panes here, windows that we could start to put into the picture space. That's important. So careful delineation, just using a pale, this pale blue. Just start to find your way about sorting out the starting points, and also I'm going to drop the awning. The awning is in shadow here. It's sort of material, so it's not as it's catching some light in places. So I'm just looking to find out where this detail and the aspects of the architecture need to be brought about.